Sí, es la parte. Ma, 5 minutos para darme, ma. 5 minutos para darme, ¿ok? Así la parte, ¿Quieres moverla, ma?
I don't think we have a single national authority with the responsibility to take leadership in coordinating the functions that could be required for a national industrial and technological mobilization. So I do think China has a model of a national defense mobilization commission with a structure that extends down to the very local level, and regular exercises and attempts to continue to innovate in that system. So I think we might look back to our own history and to some of the paradigms that China is creating today and try to find options to think much more beyond purely military mobilization and the ways to improve selective service, how we think in a much more far-reaching manner about what a whole-of-nation mobilization, particularly this industrial dimension of it, would look like in the future.
Thank you. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Well, thank you. That concludes the first round of questions, and if everybody's hanging in there, we'll just dive right into the second round. So I'll put myself on the clock again for 5 minutes. Ms. Kenya, so there's been a lot of discussion about the perceived deterrent value of the selective service system to a potential adversary. And since 1994, DOD has been saying that the draft serves as that deterrent. I want to know, in your studies, specifically with your interest in China, whether or not any references to U.S. national mobilization has appeared in any references from our near-peer powers, and how might potential competitors react if we were to suspend registration or put the selective service system in deep standby like it was before, or even disestablish it? And is the concept of total national mobilization only fulfilled by having a selective service system, right? Can we still portray that we are committed to a total national mobilization in the events of national security emergency without necessarily having a pre-event selective service registration system? Compared to China, our total force is roughly equivalent to 10% delta in total force. So I think anybody would agree that a war of attrition with China probably does not bode well based on total population for us. So your thoughts on the true deterrent value, and if it can only be met through a pre-event selective service registration system?
I think I'd say to start that I think deterrence is in the mind of the adversary, or potential adversary, I would say. And when we think about long-term competition with China and some of these risks of scenarios of outright conflict, I think we should recognize that the selective service system could have relevance in some of these worst-case scenarios that I hope will never come to pass. But in order to maintain deterrence and reinforce strategic stability in the region, including when we think about Chinese leaders' intentions potentially regarding Taiwan and otherwise, I do think we should preserve the selective service system while looking to modernize it for all of the reasons mentioned in the course of this conversation as a means of insurance. But I do think we also have to think in a more about developing more of a comprehensive framework for national mobilization beyond simply that of military manpower. So I think looking at these industrial and technological elements of ensuring the surety of our supply chains. For instance, Taiwan is a critical hub of manufacturing capability for semiconductors, and I think we do need to think about the level of risk in our global supply chains and ways to diversify and build our own indigenous capability in manufacturing, including in functions like shipbuilding, if we're to think about maintaining the overall national capacity for mobilization in a manner that can reinforce deterrence and also demonstrate the credibility of our alliance commitments in the region. And as I mentioned in my spoken and written testimony, I think exercises, perhaps hearkening back to the precedent of Campaign Reforger and otherwise, and to demonstrate our capability to mobilize rapidly and project and sustain power at distance, given the concerns of logistics, sea lift, and otherwise. I think that could be one way to further reinforce deterrence and demonstrate credibility in a way that I hope could be stabilizing in a complex and competitive relationship with our great power rivals today.
That you made regarding selective service registration being seen as kind of a negative event as opposed to a positive event, right? You get penalized if you don't do it. And again, the idea that DOD feels that it helps to close the civil divide by being a link between the all-volunteer force and the potential for a future draft. And again, as previously stated, the vast majority of young men who register do it when they're applying for financial aid, and they get to that box that says, have you registered for selective service, and if you check no, it automatically brings you to the registration page before you can proceed, or when they go to get their driver's license for the first time. Recently, an article came out that we see fewer millennials actually getting driver's licenses because they opt not to drive in today's gig economy. And so one of the primary pathways to registration seems to be diminishing. What are your thoughts on how to make it a positive experience as opposed to a negative experience?
I hope there's a lot more opinion than mine on how to make it a positive system as we go here. But, I think for me it has to be simple. The simple it gets, I'm not going to give you a really good answer on this as we go along here of what to change in the system as we go. But is there somewhere along the line, if I sign up, there's a positive reward for that. We talk about service, and we talk about on the military side the incentives we have to sign up or to retain. So if we're looking for the skill sets, and there's an opportunity to use the selective service to identify those skill sets, and we see those come forward, there is an opportunity to go, hey, we do have something in the U.S. government or local to be able to use your skills and serve your nation. Does that appeal to you? And if it does, then here's what we're going to do for you. We're going to pay a quarter or semester of school, whatever it is it puts up there. But it does bring value. Whatever you do, you have to bring value to that individual. We've all grown up with these individual liberties, and this is what we struggle with between our individual liberties that we have as U.S., and then we have the U.S. government that sometimes has to balance between those individual liberties and what's good for the nation we bring forward. That would be my recommendation. Thanks.
Originally from Los Angeles, I don't know, I think from...
Assistant Secretary Stewart, thank you. The Deputy Director of Military Accessions Policy briefed the Commission on the plan to implement conscription that would assume a throughput of 14,000 to 18,000 registrants a day nationwide during the mobilization starting at day 86. The current MEPS stations, though, are currently resourced and staffed for current throughput of the 120,000 that currently comes through from the military services. Do you believe that the MEPS stations have the ability to meet that increased demand if, in fact, a total mobilization was called?
So obviously, if we are bringing up selective service, we'll have time to go ahead and bring on the experts that we need to go ahead and fulfill that requirement. I'm assuming that we're going to have the manpower and the money to go ahead and have both the facilities and the manpower to process them. Currently, as I said, 14,000 to 18,000 a day is what they can go ahead and process. If we have locations and manpower to go ahead and meet the demand signal, which we'll have enough time to go ahead and do with the amount of time that we'll have with bringing up the selective service at that time, yes, ma'am, I think we can.
So is the expectation that the department would then use contracted support as opposed to internal, let's say, reserve components, given decisions that are currently being made in the department?
So ultimately, we would have a reserve piece and also a contracted piece, and so that would basically be used to go ahead and bring that MEPS capability up to capacity. So we're anticipating both military, which is a reserve piece, and then the actual contractors as well.
So when the department makes decisions in terms of force structure, does total mobilization or even partial mobilization be part of the consideration that is made in determining force structure? Changes?
So force structure itself is based on the current demand signal. So ultimately it's based on the operations plans, which the Joint Staff basically provides. And so it's all based on that demand signal. So currently it's not set up for a full mobilization using the selective service. Current plans use all of our forces that we have, all the reserve component, all the active component forces will be utilized in that demand signal now, not needing any additional manpower for the selective service. That's what it's set up for right now. But ultimately what you're getting at is selective services if RO plans don't match